"You're nothing but a glorified servant. Get out of my sight." The cold words were accompanied by a forceful shove to my back. My body, thrown off balance, flew through the air before tumbling down the stairs. A dull thud echoed as sharp, intense pain shot through my head and arm. I collapsed onto the cold hardwood floor. From above, a frigid gaze looked down on me. It was Chloe, and beside her stood my husband, Mason, and his mother. Not a single one of them made a move to help me. Normally, a person would be screaming or raging with anger at this point. They might even call the police and file a report, but I was surprisingly calm. I simply stood up and brushed the dust off my clothes. At that moment, none of them realized it. They had no idea that the instant they pushed me, they had triggered the complete and utter end of their own lives. I am Thompson. This year marks my 27th wedding anniversary. I'm a registered nurse and I have worked tirelessly for this family, often taking on grueling night shifts. When I married Mason, I was overjoyed. I have no family of my own, having grown up in the foster care system since I was a child. Because of that, I had always longed for a warm, loving family. I vowed to cherish his mother as if she were my own. I thought I had treated his sister, Chloe, with the affection of a real sibling, but to them, it seems I was never family. I was a convenient roommate, a wallet that brought in living expenses, a free full-time caregiver who never complained. That was the position I had earned in this house over 27 years. Tonight's incident was sparked by a trivial argument. It happened while I was preparing dinner for my mother-in-law. "There's no way I can eat this bland, tasteless food," she suddenly erupted in anger, flipping my carefully prepared tray onto the floor. I said nothing in return, simply beginning to wipe the mess from the floor. The seasoning was intentional, a thoughtful measure for my mother-in-law, who had high blood pressure and was under strict doctor's orders to limit her salt intake. As a nurse, I had poured all my knowledge and experience into calculating her daily menus. But to her, it was apparently just another form of harassment. I had just finished cleaning up and was starting up the stairs to return to my room on the second floor. That's when she came up from behind me and in a fit of rage shoved me hard in the back. "God, don't be so dramatic," came Chloe's exasperated voice from the top of the stairs. "Exactly. It's your own fault for doing things that make Mom angry," my husband added with a sigh. Blood was trickling from my head. My arm felt unnatural and a searing pain shot through it when I tried to move. My vision swam with flashing lights, and I even felt a wave of nausea. Yet, in their eyes, it seemed I was merely exaggerating my pain for attention. I slowly lifted my head. The three faces looked down on me from the top of the stairs. There was no trace of concern or panic for an injured person, only a look of condescending contempt. This was the result of 27 years of my devotion. The night I stayed up all night with his feverish mother and went straight to my day shift. The day I paid off the mountain of debt my husband had created with my own savings for my nursing career. The time I worked an extreme number of night shifts to help fund Chloe's wedding. I felt the weight of countless sacrifices and a lifetime of dedication come crashing down, shattering on the cold hardwood floor. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice so flat it surprised even me. There was no anger, no sadness, not a single drop of emotion welled up. Something inside my heart had just ended. "Good, now hurry up and clean this filthy floor," my mother-in-law scoffed before turning her back and returning to her room. My husband and Chloe followed, smirks on their faces. The sound of a door slamming shut echoed through the house. I was left alone in the dark hallway. I pressed a handkerchief to the wound on my head and slowly stood up. A throbbing pains through me. My arm was numb without feeling. Even so, I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't call an ambulance. I just walked quietly to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. Reflected back at me was the face of an exhausted middle-aged woman. I turned on the faucet and washed my face with cold water. The blood from my head wound mixed with the water, turning it a pale pink as it swirled down the drain. As I watched it disappear, my mind became preternaturally clear. All this time, I had clung desperately to the idea of becoming a family. I believed that if I just endured the unreasonable treatment, I would one day be accepted as one of them. But I'm done. There is no need to grind my life away for people who don't even treat me as a human being. The next morning, I made breakfast and did the laundry as usual. The moment my mother-in-law saw my face, a triumphant smirk appeared. Looks like you learned your lesson after getting a little taste of pain. You should have been this obedient from the start. Mason didn't even look up from his newspaper, just sipped his coffee arrogantly. They were convinced I had nowhere else to go. After all, no matter how terribly they had treated me in the past, I had always ended up silently obeying. They believed without a doubt that a little violence would make me docile this time as well. Their arrogance only solidified my resolve. I smiled serenely. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. My voice was startlingly clear. To them, my eerie calmness must have seemed like complete submission, but they were wrong. This was the calm before the storm. I took off my apron and quietly left the house. My destination wasn't the usual supermarket. It was a small local real estate agency downtown. "Welcome. How can I help you today?" the agent asked. In response, I pulled a document from my purse. It was the deed to this house. "I want to sell this house as quickly as possible." The agent's eyes widened in surprise. It was understandable. Although the house stood on land inherited from my husband's parents, the title to the building itself was in my name. When my husband's business failed and he declared bankruptcy, I had refinanced the mortgage under my own name, and it was my income and mine alone that had paid it off. It seemed they had completely forgotten that fact. I proceeded with the paperwork, my hands steady. There was no sense of tragedy. Instead, I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if heavy chains were melting away one by one. The 27 years of lingering affection and attachment had all vanished the night I fell down those stairs. All that remained was cold calculation and a firm resolve to execute my plan. After leaving the real estate agency, I hurried to my next destinations: the bank, the county clerk's office, and an international courier service. Tucked inside my handbag, an old passport long buried in the depths of a drawer lay as if brought back to life. Next to it were several documents written in English, the fragments of my true dream, a dream I had given up on years ago, left to gather dust. Today, I renewed my nursing license and sent off my paperwork for overseas credentialing at the same time. At home, they were probably complaining about tonight's dinner. They were still oblivious, not even considering who would take care of them in a house without me. They didn't know that the very air they took for granted was about to vanish from this house forever. And they had no idea that what awaited them after losing me was the beginning of an unimaginable hell. Even after 7 a.m., not a sound could be heard from the first floor. Normally, by this time, the scent of fresh coffee and bacon would be wafting through the house. Mason, still in bed, clicked his tongue in irritation. Was she still sulking because of last night's argument? To boycott her duties like a petulant child at her age, Mason kicked the blankets off violently and stomped down the stairs. "Hey, where's breakfast?" he shouted as he entered the living room, but there was no reply. No one was in the kitchen or the laundry room. The countertops were wiped clean without a single drop of water. The entire room was enveloped in the chilly morning air. Chloe came down from the second floor, rubbing her eyes. "Hey, where did she go?" "My blouse for today isn't ironed," she whined, looking around discontentedly. Next, his mother appeared, leaning on her cane with a sour expression. "So noisy this early in the morning. She probably just went to the local supermarket." Honestly, making us wait first thing in the morning is so infuriating. Mason, making no attempt to hide his irritation, plopped down heavily into a chair at the dining table. It was then that he noticed a single sheet of paper lying in the center of the table. Mason furrowed his brow and carelessly picked it up. It was an unfamiliar document enclosed in a thick legal folder. It was without a doubt a formal divorce petition and a proposed settlement agreement. In the petitioner's section, a signature and date were already neatly written in a familiar hand, stating she had retained legal counsel. Mason snorted and tossed the paper back on the table. "What's this? Some kind of pathetic stunt?" Chloe, finding it amusing, peeked over his shoulder and burst out laughing. "Wow, she's acting out some cheesy old drama. How pathetic." She'll come back crying by evening. His mother spat out her words as she yanked open the refrigerator. Look at this, she said with a triumphant look, pointing at several days' worth of pre-made meals neatly arranged in Tupperware containers. See, she prepared the food. She's just scared of being abandoned. They weren't taking the situation seriously at all. They thought she was just angry about being pushed down the stairs. That she was just trying to make them worry by hiding for a little while. They were convinced she had nowhere else to go and would soon cool her head and come back, probably begging for forgiveness on her knees. Mason, his mother, and Chloe genuinely believed this. But as afternoon turned to evening and the sky grew dark, she did not return. Mason, getting a little annoyed, took out his smartphone. When he called, a sterile automated voice informed him that the phone was turned off. He opened his messaging app and sent a text, but it remained unread. Hey, go check her room, Mason ordered. Chloe reluctantly went upstairs to the master bedroom. A few minutes later, she came back down looking puzzled. It's weird how. Her clothes, her stuff is almost all still there. Mason stood up and hurried upstairs, yanking open the closet. Chloe was right. Her everyday clothes, her favorite coat, her makeup, it was all there. The large suitcase, essential for running away, was still sitting in the corner of the room. What the hell? See, she plans on coming back soon, Mason said, letting out a huge sigh of relief as he sat on the edge of the bed. But Mason was completely blind. He didn't notice that something crucial, something that had been stored in the back of the closet, was missing. Her old passport kept securely in a small safe, along with her nursing license, and a few documents in English. Only the most important things for her life had been neatly taken away. Their destination was unknown to anyone in the family. Mason couldn't concentrate at work at all. When colleagues spoke to him, he could only manage non-committal replies. His mind was consumed by the image of that green-bordered paper on the table. But during his lunch break, his convenient way of thinking started to creep back in. She's a woman who can't live without me. She has no parents, no relatives. This house is the only place she has. By this weekend, she'll be standing at the front door with a tear-stained face. By telling himself this, he somehow managed to maintain his peace of mind. Maybe a hot dinner would be waiting for him when he got home, just like always. He opened the front door with that faint hope, but reality was cruel. In just a few days, the house had fallen into a horrifying state of disarray. A mountain of unwashed laundry was piled up in the utility room. The sink was overflowing with used dishes that were beginning to emit a foul odor. The trash hadn't been taken out, and fruit flies were starting to buzz around. The pre-made meals had run out, and the table was littered with empty takeout containers. The hardwood floors, which no one had vacuumed, were becoming noticeably dusty. Chloe was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. Hey, my blouse isn't washed. I need it for tomorrow. The thought of washing it herself apparently didn't even cross her mind. His mother, unable to hide her frustration, had been complaining in the living room all day. How inconsiderate. When she comes back, I'll give her a piece of my mind. I don't even know where she put my blood pressure medication, and she's the one who always managed my doctor's appointments. They had absolutely no grasp of their own affairs. The consequences of having delegated everything to her were now hitting them all at once. Amidst this chaos, a thick envelope arrived in the mailbox. The sender was an unfamiliar law firm in the city. Mason, with a sense of dread, tore open the envelope and pulled out several pages of documents written there in cold legal jargon. Was content that made Mason's eyes bulge. The document was a formal notice from an attorney. It began with a strong warning that all future contact must go through the lawyer. It then listed 3 main demands. The first was the formal signing of the enclosed divorce settlement. The second was a claim for the return of her separate property contributions over the past 27 years. The third was to consent to the sale of their jointly owned home. Sale? What the hell is this? Mason felt the blood drain from his face. His hands trembled and he nearly dropped the papers. The house was indeed built on his parents' land, but the title to the building itself was entirely in his wife's name. Years ago, when Mason's business failed and he incurred massive debts, she had agreed to change the title as a condition for paying off his debts with her nursing income. Mason had conveniently erased this fact from his mind. "Hey, what is this all about?" Mason muttered in a trembling voice, about to show the documents to his mother. Just then, the doorbell rang loudly. He checked the video monitor and saw two men in suits standing there. Mason hesitantly pressed the intercom button. "We're from the real estate company. We're here today to conduct the appraisal for the property you listed." The man held up a key. "We already have the key as per the owner's instruction." But Mason was speechless, staring blankly at the monitor. His throat was parched, and he couldn't even swallow. This wasn't a joke, it wasn't a stunt, it wasn't a temporary runaway act. She was serious. She was dead serious about selling this house and kicking them out. What's more, she had prepared everything meticulously behind the scenes, cutting off all their escape routes before making her move. He felt a sensation like cold, icy mud seeping up from his feet. Their sweet, arrogant assumption that she'll come back had just shattered with a deafening crash. The absolute superiority they had enjoyed by treating her like a slave for years had been completely reversed. But Mason and his family had yet to realize it. This was merely the prologue to their revenge. The first domino in a perfectly orchestrated plan had just fallen. Soon, the gates to a hell beyond their wildest imagination would begin to swing open. Mason glared furiously at the video monitor, his eyes bloodshot. On the screen, two men in suits stood holding thick binders, their expressions unnervingly calm. "Get lost. This is my house. I won't allow you to do as you please." Mason bellowed through the intercom. The men exchanged a look. "Sir, we have a formal request from the property owner to proceed with the sale, and we already have the keys. We need to inspect the interior." Their businesslike, cold tone further wounded Mason's pride. "I am the owner. That stupid woman did this without my consent. Get off my property now, or I'm calling the cops," Mason yelled, then slammed the call button off, breathing heavily. His heart hammered in his chest, and a clammy sweat broke out on his forehead. He stormed back into the living room where his mother and Chloe were waiting with disgruntled faces. What was that about, making all that racket and disturbing the neighbors? His mother asked in her shrill voice, lounging on the sofa. "That runaway hired a real estate agent." "What? She's trying to sell the house." "Unbelievable," Chloe shrieked, slamming her smartphone down on the table. "We can't let her. Call the police and have her arrested." His mother, her face turning crimson, pounded the floor violently with her cane. "After we took care of her for 27 years, what an ungrateful wretch. That's what you get for taking in a woman with no family. She's nothing but a common thief." They genuinely believed they were the pitiful victims. The fact that they had pushed his wife down the stairs and seriously injured her had been completely erased from their convenient memories. Mason took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "That's right. There's no need for me to panic. She's just a hired nurse with no connections. She has no legal expertise, no power to move large sums of money. Hiring a lawyer was probably just a bluff, paid for with her last bit of pocket money. A little pressure and she'll come crawling back." "Don't worry," Mason said with a cruel smirk, picking up his smartphone. "I'll teach her a lesson. First, I'm going to cut off her money supply completely." Mason's target was their joint bank account where her salary was deposited. He also had a debit card for the account. And of course he knew the PIN. "I'll empty that account where her paycheck goes. Then in a few days, she'll have no way to survive and will have to come crying back to me. She won't have the money to rent a cheap apartment or even buy food for the day." Mason quickly opened his laptop and logged into the bank's website. With trembling fingers, he typed in the password and went to the balance inquiry screen. The loading icon spun and then the page refreshed, but the number displayed on the screens made Mason gasp. What is this? What the hell happened? The balance was a mere $30. His wife's salary, which should have been deposited reliably each month, was gone. The direct deposit had been swiftly changed to a completely different unknown account. Furthermore, The savings she had diligently accumulated over the years through her frugal habits, every single penny was gone, transferred to another location. All that remained was the leftover pittance from the few hundred Mason occasionally contributed for living expenses. No way. Did she steal my money? Mason trembled with irrational anger and slammed his fist on the keyboard. But if he thought about it calmly, it was all money his wife had earned through grueling night shifts. Most of Mason's own income disappeared into his hobbies, gambling and drinks with his buddies. His wife had prepared to completely separate her finances long before she left the house. A sick feeling growing in his stomach, Mason opened his credit card app. It was the family card, which Mason had been using freely under the guise of shared assets. On the screen, the words "account suspended" were displayed in merciless red letters. She had perfectly executed the suspension process the day before. "Mason, where's my special heating patch?" His mother's irritated voice called from upstairs, yanking him back to grim reality. "I don't know. It's probably in your room. Find it yourself," Mason yelled back. His mother started complaining even louder. "My doctor's appointment is tomorrow. Who's going to drive me? Call a cab. I have to work tomorrow." Before, his wife would have taken her to the hospital without a wink of sleep after a night shift. She would listen to the doctor's complex explanations, ensure the right prescriptions were picked up, and manage all future appointments. Neither Mason, Chloe, nor his mother even knew what medications she took daily. They knew the name of the hospital, but not even the name of her doctor. "That useless woman never around when you need her," Chloe grumbled, kicking a cushion, frustrated that no one was making her dinner. The gears of the family were grinding to a halt. They had never been able to solve a single problem on their own. They had simply sat back and acted superior on the strong, devoted foundation that was his wife. Now that the absolute foundation was gone, they were as helpless as infants. They had never possessed the ability to survive on their own. Just then, Mason's smartphone vibrated. It was a follow-up notification email from the same law firm. Mason felt his stomach turn to ice as he opened the email with a trembling finger. What was written there was a terrifying fact he had never anticipated. The subject line read, "Regarding a claim for reimbursement of unpaid expenses." Mason's eyes widened, and he brought his face inches from the screen. The payment for his mother's long-term care insurance, and the fees for the home health aide who came several times a week. Mason had assumed these were all being paid from his mother's ample pension. But the reality was completely different. His mother's pension was spent entirely on her own lavish lifestyle and on spoiling Chloe. The shortfall in care costs and the expensive non-covered medications were all secretly being paid out of his wife's salary from her back-breaking work. The attached statement showed a claim for over $30, though zero tallied from the last several years. "You've got to be kidding me. There's no way I can pay this kind of money all of a sudden." His wife hadn't just left out of anger. She had been shouldering the massive debts of this family, hiding them on their behalf. Now, she was mercilessly throwing that responsibility right back at them where it originally belonged. Furthermore, a cold sentence was added at the end of the email. The contracts for electricity and water were under the client's sole name. "We are writing to inform you that as of today, the termination of these services has been completed." The very moment Mason finished reading that decisive sentence, the bright lights in the living room suddenly went out with a dull click. The television screen went black, and the quiet hum of the air conditioner ceased completely. "Hey, what's going on? A power outage?" Chloe's panicked shriek echoed in the darkness. Mason stood stunned in the dark, clutching his phone, its screen now the only source of light. The trigger for their descent into the mere had been pulled. Their elegant, arrogant lifestyle was about to collapse from its very foundations in just 2 days. They never had a chance to fight back. "Where are you hiding that thief?" The next morning, Mason was screaming in the lobby of the local general hospital. The very workplace his wife had dedicated 27 years to. His frustration from having the electricity and water shut off had already reached its peak. The thought that it was his own fault didn't even cross his mind. It was all the fault of his wife, who had abandoned them and disappeared. She's a criminal who stole my money and ran away. Bring Alla Thompson out here now. The receptionists were terrified. Patients in the waiting area stared from a distance, but Mason didn't care about the onlookers. In fact, he intended to thoroughly destroy his wife's social standing. I picked that pathetic orphan off the street. I made a low-class woman who grew up in the foster system part of my family, and this is how she repays my kindness. A monster like that has no right to work here. Mason's words were filled with malice and boundless contempt. A verbal assault meant to trample on his wife's dignity, her career, and her very life. He calculated that if he made a big enough scene, the hospital would have no choice but to fire her. If she lost her job, she would lose her source of income. Then in a few days, she would surely come crying back to him. Before you call the police, give me her final paycheck. As her husband, I have a legal right to it, he shouted triumphantly. Just then, a cold, quiet voice echoed from down the hall. The police have already been called. A veteran head nurse appeared, standing with a determined posture. She held a single stiff document in her hand. What? You've got some nerve. When the police get here, I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them what a crazy, horrible woman she really is. Mason sneered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the head nurse didn't even flinch. Yes, please do tell the police everything in detail about the contents of this medical report, she said, thrusting the document in front of Mason's face. The blood drained from Mason's face. There, printed on the hospital's official letterhead and bearing the attending physician's signature, was a terrifying fact. Head laceration and fractured ulna, full recovery estimated at 4 weeks. Injuries consistent with an intentional assault resulting from a fall down a flight of stairs. Mason swallowed hard, his eyes darting between the report and the head nurse's face. Received treatment here right after she left the house. At that time, we documented everything, including the domestic violence. She reported, "This is a serious assault case. The police are very interested." Mason felt his throat go dry. The injuries he had dismissed as an over-the-top performance that night had now become powerful, subjective evidence that had turned on him with Fang's beard. "No, that's not it. She just fell on her own," Mason stammered, but his voice cracked pathetically. "You can tell your excuses to the police." "And one more thing," the head nurse said, looking Mason straight in the eye with a cold gaze. "Allah has already formally resigned from this hospital. Her final paycheck, cashed out PTO, and all other entitlements have been transferred to her new individual bank account. From this point forward, this hospital will protect Allah's privacy with all its resources." Mason's last hope shattered into a million pieces. He hadn't cut off her income. She had already secured her rightful severance and escaped to a place completely beyond his reach, and she had done so after perfectly setting the stage to send them to prison. Where is she now? We have no obligation to tell you that. In the distance, the wail of police sirens grew closer. Mason's feet felt rooted to the spot in terror. The illusion of their superiority was completely shattered. They were just flailing around in the elaborate trap his wife had set. As the police sirens wailed, Mason's mind raced. He absolutely could not let them take him in. If this was treated as a felony assault, his position at his company would be in serious jeopardy. When the officers arrived, Mason abruptly changed his tune. "I'm so sorry. This was all just an extension of a small marital dispute," he said, feigning tears and putting a hand over his heart in mock remorse. "My wife, she's been a bit mentally unstable lately. Her paranoia has gotten severe, and she accidentally fell down the stairs on her own. But she's blaming my mother and ran away from home." With his glib tongue, Mason skillfully tried to manipulate the officers. He knew that police are often reluctant to intervene deeply in what appears to be a private family matter. It was an extremely malicious and calculated lie. "The hospital is just overreacting a bit. As her husband of many years, I know her mental state best." The police temporarily backed down and Mason fled the hospital. There was no longer any look of relief on his face. All that remained was a burning hatred for the wife who had tried to trap him. In the taxi on the way back, Mason's eyes held a strange glint. That stupid, I'll never forgive her. I'll crush her. I'll destroy her socially. He immediately called a shady old friend from college, a consultant who knew his way around legal gray areas. After a brief explanation, a wicked laugh echoed from the other end of the line. That's easy. Your wife's trying to sell the house, right? Just file an emergency injunction with the court to block the sale. That'll tie the property up for months, maybe years. Then his friend offered another, more chilling piece of advice. You can get her bank accounts frozen too. Go to the bank and cry your eyes out. Tell them your wife is exploiting your elderly dementia adult mother and has stolen her life savings. File a police report for theft of family assets, and you're golden. A twisted, evil smile spread across Mason's face. Perfect. I'll frame her as a vile thief. I'll completely obliterate her reputation and make her come crying and begging at my feet. That afternoon, Mason sprang into action, creating a mountain of forged documents. At the bank, he presented cleverly falsified medical records for his mother. My wife has been siphoning my mother's care funds into her own account. Please, you have to freeze all her accounts immediately. My sick mother's life is at stake. The bank, swayed by Mason's convincing performance and crocodile tears, placed an emergency hold on his accounts. Next, he filed a report for a high-risk missing person with the police. My wife has disappeared in a state of mental distress with several thousand. I'm afraid she might harm herself. Please find her and get her help. He had successfully painted as a dangerous, unstable fugitive. Now, if she so much as stepped outside, she would be detained by the police. In their cold, dark home with no electricity or water, Mason triumphantly reported the results of his perfect counterattack to his family. His mother clapped her wrinkled hands, her vulgar laughter echoing in the darkness. Well done, Mason. The perfect punishment for that ungrateful wench. If her accounts are frozen, she must be shivering on some street corner by now. Chloe, her face illuminated by her phone screen, smirked. This is hilarious. The police are after her. I bet she'll be at our doorstep tomorrow on her knees, begging to come back. They were once again convinced of their absolute power. All's rebellion was nothing more than the futile struggle of a helpless weakling. As they ate their cold convenience store dinners, their hearts swelled with a twisted sense of superiority. When she comes back, we'll take away her phone and monitor her every move. We'll make her do twice the chores, twice the caregiving. They cheerfully plotted their cruel plans in the dark. Meanwhile, in a small, quiet room in a budget hotel in the city, Alara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her laptop screen. A merciless red error message was displayed prominently. This credit card cannot be processed at this time. No matter how many times she carefully re-entered the card number, the result was the same. This was the payment screen for the final visa application fee needed to renew her Canadian permanent residency. If this fee wasn't paid today, the entire process would be reset to zero. A bad feeling creeping in, she quickly opened her bank's mobile app. Cold, impersonal text sat in the center of the screen. Your accounts have been temporarily frozen. For a moment, the blood ran cold in her veins, and her fingertips began to tremble. Just then, her phone rang. It was her attorney. All the situation has become much worse. Please listen calmly. The lawyer's voice was tense, heavy with a gravity she hadn't heard before. Your husband has filed a court injunction to stop the sale of your house. Furthermore, he has made a false declaration to the bank that you embezzled his mother's assets. He's also reported you to the police as a mentally unstable, high-risk missing person, and there's a nationwide alert out for you. All remained silent, clutching the old passport in her hand. Your flight to Canada is the day after tomorrow, early morning, correct? The lawyer asked. In a choked voice, managed a quiet, yes, if the police find you at the airport, they will certainly detain you for questioning. If that happens, it will be impossible for you to get on that flight as scheduled. It could cause an irreversible, fatal delay in your visa process. After the call ended, Ala let out a deep, heavy sigh. Outside, a cold night rain beat against the window pane. 27 years. 27 years of enduring her mother-in-law's unreasonable verbal abuse, of paying off her husband's debts, of suppressing her own life, of enduring beyond endurance, to finally grasp this path to freedom. On the bed lay several faded documents written in English. They were the certificates for the Canadian nursing qualifications she had worked so hard to obtain when she was younger, the dream she had once completely abandoned and sealed away to marry Mason. Her last ticket to a new life was now about to be torn to shreds right before her eyes. Mason's counterattack was far more vicious and cruel than had anticipated. He had abused the law and public institutions to completely block her escape. With no access to money, unable to sell the house, and now hunted by the police as a criminal, she was completely isolated, hiding alone in a small hotel room. Maybe I don't deserve to escape from here after all. The face staring back at her from the bathroom mirror was unbelievably exhausted. The wound on her forehead from where she was pushed down the stairs throbbed in time with her heartbeat. A deep sense of despair, accompanied by the sound of the cold rain, tightened its grip on her heart. The triumphant, ugly laughter of Mason and his family echoed in her mind like a phantom. At this rate, she would be forcibly dragged back to that hellish house. She would be falsely accused of embezzlement and forced to live as their slave for the rest of her life. A single warm teardrop fell onto the cover of her passport. Her perfect escape plan was crumbling with a loud crash. All was cornered at the bottom of a dark pit where no light could reach. Intense fear and panic painted her heart with the blackest despair. However, even in this absolutely disadvantageous and desperate situation, Mason and his family had made a fatal, irreversible, and decisive mistake. They had, without realizing it, stepped on a massive landmine. In their minds, they had completely cornered, but in reality, they had just tightened a thick noose around their own necks. This moment of absolute crisis was the very trigger for the great reversal that would drag them into hell. The arrogant laughing family had no inkling of what was to come. Not a single millimeter of a clue. Calm down and listen to me. The lawyer's cool voice echoed from the smartphone speaker. Era, who had been sinking into the depths of despair, slowly lifted her head. They have just willingly stepped on an irreversible landmine. The tension in the lawyer's voice was gone. Instead, it had the ring of a cold-blooded hunter who had perfectly ensnared his prey. It's about the false report of embezzlement they filed with the police and the bank. This will be our ultimate trump card to bring about their complete ruin. Allah held her breath and sat up straight on the edge of the bed. A trump card? Yes, your husband made a fatal mistake. He dug his own grave. The lawyer explained that Mason's false accusation that his wife had embezzled his mother-in-law's care funds constituted the serious crime of filing a false report. Why? Because had been preparing for this for over 6 months. For the past 10 years, she had kept every single receipt for medical and care expenses she had paid out of pocket for her mother-in-law. She had these documents reviewed by an accountant and then officially recorded and dated at a notary public's office. You have perfect legally binding evidence proven down to the last cent that you were the one paying. When we present this to the police, your husband's claim will instantly be proven false. For deceiving the police and manipulating an investigation, he himself could face arrest. The lawyer assured her that the freeze on her accounts would be lifted immediately the next morning when he presented the official records to the bank. You will definitely make the payment deadline for your visa. Don't worry. Tears streamed from Laura's eyes as the threat of tension she'd been holding on to finally snapped. These were not tears of despair, they were tears of relief and hope, the signal of a coming counterattack. The meticulous household and caregiving records she had kept for so long had now become her strongest shield and the sharpest sword to pierce her enemies. Their arrogance has completely sealed their own fate, hasn't it? The lawyer said quietly. All nodded deeply, without a word. She gripped her old passport tightly once more. The preparations for her counterattack were already perfectly in place, right in her own hands. The next morning, in the cold, dark, powerless house, Mason was seething. Is the taxi here yet? I've been trying to call one for ages, but it's busy this morning. Chloe screamed, panicking with her phone in hand. Today was the day of his mother's monthly checkup at the general hospital. Previously, Ara had arranged everything, including a wheelchair-accessible taxi for transport. But none of them even knew the number to call for such a service. It took them over an hour just to hail a regular cab. Damn it! All this wasted time and money because of that thieving woman, Mason muttered, loosening his tie and clicking his tongue. But Big Brother, her accounts are frozen, right? Yeah, by now she's probably on the street crying because she can't even afford to buy a loaf of bread. Hilarious. When she comes back, we'll make her work twice as hard. Chloe's vulgar laughter filled the taxi. Beside her, her mother tapped her cane on the floor in satisfaction. That's the punishment she deserves for stealing my money. She needs to be taught a lesson. They were still completely unaware that they had stepped on the terrifying landmine of filing a false police report. Their troubles didn't end when they arrived at the hospital lobby. Mason froze in front of the automated check-in kiosk. Hey, where's her insurance card? How should I know? Don't you have it? Why would I have it? Mom, do you have it? His mother's just scowled. I just sit and wait. Era had managed the insurance card, the Medicare card, the medication list, everything. With nothing in hand, they were forced to go through the entire registration process from scratch at the main desk. Do you know the names of the medications she usually takes? The nurse at the counter asked. The three of them just looked at each other and fell silent. Blood pressure pills, something like that, Mason answered vaguely. The nurse sighed, looking troubled. Do you know of any allergies or her recent average blood pressure readings? The doctor can figure that out. Just let us through, Mason snapped. Other patients began to stare at them coldly. They projected their own incompetence onto the staff, lashing out at everyone around them. For 27 years, they had never bothered to learn a single piece of information vital to their own mother's life. They had simply sat in the box called family and pushed everything onto Era. That cruel fact was now being exposed piece by piece in the clinical setting of the hospital. After waiting for over an hour, his mother's number was finally called. Mason and Chloe pushed her wheelchair into the examination room with sullen faces. Took you long enough. How long were you planning on making us wait? Mason barked at the doctor as soon as he entered. The elderly doctor, who had been looking at his computer monitor, looked up at them in surprise. I'm sorry. Who are you? The doctor's question made Mason's face turn even redder with anger. Who are we? I'm her son, Mason. We're here for my mother's appointment. Ah, yes. I was told her son would be coming, the doctor said, looking back and forth between his chart and their faces, with a puzzled expression. It's just this is the first time any family has come into the examination room in 10 years. The words made Mason falter for a second. It's always been your wife Era who accompanied her for everything, wasn't it? What happened to Era today? Mason snorted and crossed his arms arrogantly. Oh, a woman like that is gone. She stole my mother's money and ran away. She'll be caught soon enough, though. From now on, we'll be taking care of her. I'll be paying the medical bills, so you don't have to worry. Mason puffed out his chest, expecting the doctor to be impressed by what a responsible son he was. But the doctor's reaction was the complete opposite of what Mason expected. The warmth instantly vanished from the doctor's face, replaced by an extremely cold gaze. You, the one who drove her away, will be taking care of her. The doctor's voice was quiet, but it held a terrifying, blood-chilling tone. Yeah, that's right. Is there a problem? Mason said with an insolent look. The doctor slowly stood up and retrieved a thick binder from a shelf in the back. It was his mother's complete medical file for the past decade. You all really haven't heard the secret from Era, have you? Secret? What secret? The doctor let out a sigh filled with deep anger and slammed the binder onto the desk. You said it was a matter of money, then let me show you the reality. The doctor opened the file to the first page. Mason's heart leaped into his throat as he saw the unbelievable contents written there. The ground beneath their arrogant feet began to crumble. Right here, the true hell they had desperately avoided facing was about to open its What the doctor spread on the desk was a massive pile of documents. From faded old papers to recent ones, all filled with a familiar, neat handwriting. "What is this?" Mason asked, his face twitching as he pointed at the stack. "These are the records of what has kept your mother alive," the doctor stated coldly, flipping through them one by one. The complex applications for long-term care benefits, the paperwork for limits on high-cost medical expenses, the medical consent forms for every late-night emergency room visit. All of these procedures and signatures, the signature line on every single document was filled with the same name. Allah Thompson, not Mason, not his mother, but she was the living wife. "Of course she did it," Mason shouted defensively. "She did it all on her own, without consulting us, her family." At those words, the doctor looked at him as if he were seeing something unbelievable. "Did it on her own." He sighed and opened a different blue binder. "Then please take a look at this expense report." Lined up before them was a dizzying list of figures: specialized treatments not covered by insurance, receipts for the accessible taxi service, used multiple times a month, special fees for the dedicated nighttime caregiver. "My mother's pension was supposed to pay for all that," Mason yelled, and his mother nodded frantically. "That's right, I gave her money every month." But the doctor quietly shook his head. "Your mother's pension was nowhere near enough, all paid for the entire shortfall. She took on more night shifts, sacrificing her own health to do so." Mason was speechless, staring at the blue binder. That $30,000 bill from the lawyer, it wasn't an exaggeration or a bluff, it was the undeniable truth. Now that Alara has removed herself as the primary financial proxy, new arrangements must be made, the doctor said, handing Mason a referral slip. "You will need to go down to the billing department immediately to set up a new payment plan. Furthermore, they informed me that a COA of $3,000 for next week's advanced imaging is required before we can proceed." The blood drained from Mason's face. He couldn't possibly pay $3,000. His credit cards were canceled and he had no savings. "Wait a minute. I can't just come up with that kind of money." Just then, Mason's smartphone rang shrilly. The caller ID showed the branch number of the bank he had visited yesterday. Mason, grasping at straws, quickly answered the phone. "Hello. You can release the funds to my account, right?" But the voice of the bank representative on the other end was as cold as ice. "Mr. Mason Thompson, I am very sorry, but we have just lifted the freeze on your wife's accounts." "What? What?" "She's a criminal who committed fraud." Mason screamed, oblivious to the hospital waiting room around him. But the representative's next words sent Mason plunging into hell. "Your wife's legal counsel has submitted official documentation. It's a notarized record of her out-of-pocket payments spanning the last 10 years. It has been proven that there was no embezzlement whatsoever, and the funds are her legitimate property." Mason's legs began to shake uncontrollably. "Also, we've received a call from the police department. They would like to speak with you regarding a suspected case of filing a false report. Officers are already on their way to your residence." The call ended. The smartphone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the floor with a dull thud that echoed in the silent examination room. "Big brother, what's wrong?" Chloe asked, looking at Mason's face with anxiety. Mason couldn't answer, he just stared into the void. The vicious trap he had set had turned and snapped shut on him. Not only had he failed to get the money, but he was now a person of interest to the police. Before him lay an insurmountable medical bill, and the home he was supposed to return to was still dark, without power. "How will you be paying today?" The doctor's cold voice pierced Mason's ears. The problems weren't being solved, they were snowballing. The price for losing Era was far too high. But their hell was only just beginning. When the biggest secret had been hiding was revealed, they would come to know true despair. The chilly air of the examination room felt like it was crushing Mason. The very real and very heavy number, $3,000, was laid out before him. His wallet held only a few bucks and all his credit cards were useless. Mason had literally no way to pay. Worse, the terror from the phone call, the news that police were heading to his house, made his heart pound violently and sent a cold sweat running down his back. I don't have the money with me today, Mason managed to squeeze out, his voice barely a whisper. I'll come back another day to pay. We'll be leaving now. Feeling the doctor's astonished and icy gaze on his back, Mason scrambled to his feet and reached for the doorknob. Get Mom and let's go quickly, he hissed at Chloe, roughly grabbing the wheelchair and bolting from the room. The crowd of patients in the waiting area watched them with suspicion. Their hushed whispers sounded like mockery, but he no longer had the luxury of caring what others thought. They fled the hospital lobby and hurried to the taxi stand, constantly looking over their shoulders, terrified by the phantom image of approaching police officers. The ride home was silent, like a funeral procession. No one spoke a word, only the sound of tires on wet asphalt. When they arrived home, the three of them rushed inside the dark house as if seeking refuge. In the powerless, freezing living room, the pent-up frustration finally exploded. What is the meaning of this? His mother's hysterical shriek echoed through the house. You acted so tough, saying you'd get her money back. Now the police are after you. What did you do? Pounding the floor with her cane, she relentlessly attacked him. Chloe joined in, her arms crossed, her voice dripping with venom. You're all talk, big brother. This is just the worst. My friends can't find out I'm involved in a police mess. Fix this. We can't even eat a proper meal in this dump. Mason grabbed his hair in frustration and despair. Shut up. You think I know what to do? Stop complaining and use your own damn heads for once. This whole mess started because Mom pushed her down the stairs. His mother, incensed by his attempt to shift blame, grew even more furious. How dare you speak to your mother that way? This is all because you, as the husband, couldn't keep your wife in line. Don't you talk big when you're so useless. It was the moment the fragile illusion of family shattered completely. What held them together was never love or compassion. It was the convenience of Aller's existence and the money and comfort her sacrifices provided. That was the only glue holding this ugly family together. Now that the absolute foundation was gone, all that remained was a nasty blame game. They turned on each other, hurling insults, only succeeding in wounding each other more deeply. Just then, Mason's smartphone vibrated briefly, its screen casting a white glow in the darkness. The name displayed on the screen made Mason's heart freeze. It was a direct call from his immediate superior, the sales director. A call from the director on a weekday afternoon was absolutely unheard of. With a trembling finger, Mason answered, "Hello, this is Mason. Where are you and what are you doing?" The director's voice on the other end was beyond angry. It was ice cold. "I'm at home. Is there some kind of trouble?" Trouble doesn't even begin to describe it. Get yourself to the police station right now. Mason's throat tightened and his breath caught in his chest. I heard the police went to your house earlier, but you weren't there, so they came all the way to the office. Two uniformed officers asking questions, something about filing a false report and maliciously obstructing bank operations. Having the police investigate our office is the biggest scandal in this company's history. No, that's a misunderstanding. It was my wife. She stole Mason, tried desperately to explain, but the director cut him off coldly. Save your excuses for the police, not the company. The whole floor is in an uproar because of you. Do you have any idea how much damage this will do to the company if our clients hear about this? Don't come to the office for the foreseeable future. You are on indefinite suspension, effective immediately. HR will contact you once the disciplinary committee decides on your termination. That is all. The dial tone buzzed emptily in Mason's ear. The phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the cold floor. It's over, my life. Everything is completely over. His position at the company, his stable salary, the pathetic pride he had built up, all of it, had crumbled into dust like a sandcastle in just a few days. Big brother, was that from work? Chloe asked with an anxious voice. But Mason no longer had the energy to answer. In the depths of his despair, a single obsessive thought emerged. There was only one way to overturn this catastrophic situation. He had to find, even if it meant getting on his knees and begging, and make her drop the police report. He had to get her to come back to this house and fix everything. There was no other way for him to survive. Mason stood up as if possessed and ran frantically up to the second-floor bedroom, her destination. There has to be a clue left behind. In the darkness, using only his phone's flashlight, he began to tear through belongings. The back of the closet, the drawers of the vanity, under the mattress, he turned the room upside down, throwing things everywhere. Like a man possessed, Mason desperately searched for a clue. Then he noticed a small locked drawer at the bottom of a desk. He grabbed a metal screwdriver from the room and used it to pry the lock open with all his might. With a sickening crack of splintering wood, he yanked the drawer out. Inside was a small paper box. He hastily opened it. Inside was a bundle of important-looking documents. What is this? Mason shone his phone's light on the top document. It was a thick final payment reminder from an unfamiliar credit company. But the name on it was not. It was his own. The shocking amount on the bill made Mason's eyes go wide. But as he read the details, the blood drained from his face completely. It was a statement for a personal debt he had secretly racked up years ago. A pathetic debt from gambling and nights out with his friends. A shameful debt from his past that he thought he had paid off long ago. But the document spelled out the horrifying truth. All had been paying it off for him in small monthly installments, and since the day she left, those payments had stopped completely. The remaining balance was nearly $20,000. Underneath that was a notice of mandatory repossession for a car loan, the big luxury minivan that Mason proudly drove around on weekends that too had been financed under Ara's name and her good credit. The notice stated that because payments had stopped, the car would be repossessed in a matter of days. Everything he believed he owned, that he had earned through his own strength, was an illusion. Mason's began to shake violently, collapsing weakly to the floor. The brutally cruel truth that he had been completely supported by Ara was thrust upon him in the most violent way possible. A counterattack was never even possible. Mason's entire life was nothing more than a structure built on the solid foundation of Ara. With that foundation gone, he was just a helpless being falling into the abyss. For the first time, Mason realized how foolish and pathetic he truly was. But that wasn't all. At the very bottom of the stack of papers was a crumpled, small receipt. It was a receipt for an international package dated just a few days ago. Mason squinted, trying to read the print. The destination country and address had been deliberately blacked out with a thick marker. Why would a wife who was supposedly hiding somewhere in the country need to send a package overseas? What was she planning? Where was she trying to go? This new, completely unexpected mystery threw Mason's confused mind into even greater turmoil. He had been searching for a way to fight back, but all he found was deeper despair and a formless terror. The turning point was the realization of his own complete and utter defeat and powerlessness. But their true hell was only just beginning, and it was about to get much deeper and much darker. The debt collection notice and the car repossession letter in his hands. Mason, with violently trembling hands, hastily shoved them back into the drawer. If Mom or Chloe finds these, my authority in this house is finished. The only reason I could act like the head of the family was because they thought I was the breadwinner. They can never know I was actually being supported by Ara. Mason forced himself to calm his breathing and went downstairs, pretending nothing had happened. In the dark living room, his mother and Chloe were still complaining. Seriously, what are we going to do? Big brother, hurry up and find that woman. Mason forced a smile and puffed out his chest. Don't worry, I have a great idea. I'll threaten her lawyer and get her location. I'll drive over there myself tomorrow and drag her back. You can count on me. With that desperate lie, Mason managed to get through the moment, but his heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. The fear that everything would come crashing down by morning was terrifying. And the next morning, Mason's worst fears became a merciless reality. A loud mechanical noise echoed from outside the house. Chloe, looking out the window, let out a scream. Big brother, there are strange men outside. Mason rushed out to find a large tow truck parked in front of the house. Men in work uniforms were attaching cables to his prized luxury minivan. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? "That's my car," Mason yelled as he ran towards them, but the men were calm. "We're here on behalf of the credit company to repossess the vehicle. We've already received consent from the registered owner, Miss Aller Thompson. This is a legal repossession due to non-payment." The blood drained from Mason's face. His mother, hearing the commotion, came hobbling outside. "What is the meaning of this, Mason? Why are they taking the car?" Chloe was also panicking, trying to grab at the workers. "Stop it. I used that car to go out with my friends. You bought it with your salary, didn't you? Say something." But Mason couldn't move. Neighbors were watching the scene with curious eyes, their hushed whispers piercing Mason's ears. "I guess that nice car was in his wife's name. He always drove it around so arrogantly, but now it's being repossessed for non-payment. How embarrassing." Mason's pathetic pride was utterly shattered in front of the entire neighborhood. There was no room left for excuses. The cables tightened and the minivan was unceremoniously hoisted onto the tow truck. Mason just stood there silently, watching the symbol of his false bravado being taken away. Back in the house, his mother's rage exploded. "Explain yourself." "The car was in Nara's name. Weren't you paying for it with your salary?" Cornered, Mason knew he could no longer lie. "It wasn't my money. She was paying for it. I had old debts, and she was paying them off for me." The moment she heard those words, his mother collapsed with a look of utter despair. "No. Does that mean we were completely dependent on that woman for everything? I can't believe it. You really are the lowest piece of scum, big brother," Chloe said, looking at him with contempt before spitting out her words. "I'm leaving this house. I'll stay at a friend's." Chloe hastily packed a bag and stormed out, a selfish act to escape the trouble she had helped create. Left behind in the dark house were Mason and his weeping mother. "What are we going to do? We have no money for the hospital bills, no money for food tomorrow." His mother trembled, finally realizing the horror of their situation. Mason clenched his teeth, his fists tightening with a mixture of intense panic and hatred. He was suspended from work, his debts were exposed, and he had lost his car. If this continued, their lives would truly be over. He had to find a force to drop all the legal actions. "No matter what, I have to get that woman back to this house and make her my slave again." Mason ran upstairs and grabbed the receipt he had found the previous night. The part with the international destination was blacked out. He held it up to the window, trying to use the faint sunlight to see through the ink. "Please, there has to be a hint." As he stared, his eyes bloodshot. The faint impression of letters became visible. It was a string of English letters. "Embassy, embassy." The scattered pieces in Mason's mind suddenly clicked together. Allah had taken her old passport and English documents, and she had sent an important package to an embassy. Is she planning to flee the country? A cold chill ran down Mason's spine. If she escaped overseas, U.S. law and police would be powerless. He would never find her, and he and his family would be left to drown in debt. "I will not let her escape. I'll catch her at the airport and drag her back by force if I have to." Mason's eyes were now filled with a dangerous madness. Panic had robbed him of all rational judgment, pushing him toward reckless action. He had no intention of going through a lawyer or any other proper channel. He picked up his phone and called his shady consultant friend again. "Hey, I need a favor. Find out's departure schedule. I don't care how you do it. I'll pay you whatever you want later." Mason, with a desperate empty promise, gooed his friend into tracking's movements. They still didn't know what they were chasing. It wasn't. It was a giant trap that would bring about their own complete destruction. Mason's panic-fueled rampage was accelerating the situation toward an even more fatal conclusion. In the dark house, the silence was broken by his mother's choked sobs. "Mason, help me." When Mason rushed downstairs, an unbelievable sight awaited him. His mother had collapsed in the hallway. Trying to get to the bathroom in the dark, she had fallen and soiled herself horribly. A powerful, nauseating stench filled the air. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" Mason instinctively pinched his nose, grimacing. "I'm sorry, my body. I can't move. Clean yourself up, it's disgusting." Mason looked for a towel but couldn't find one in the dark. He reluctantly tried to use his own shirt, but a wave of intense nausea overcame him. Retching, he ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. Acid burned his throat, and tears and snot streamed down his face. At that moment, a realization hit Mason like a blow to the head. She did this every day. After a grueling night shift, with her exhausted body, she cleaned Mom up without a single complaint, with a smile on her face. She got up multiple times in the middle of the night, never showing any annoyance while we slept soundly upstairs. The crushing weight of that truth hit Mason for the first time. "Mason, my chest hurts. I can't breathe." His mother's fragmented cries came from the hallway. Mason rushed back to her and felt the blood drain from his face. Her face was pale and a cold sweat poured down her skin. Her breathing was shallow and she looked like she was about to lose consciousness. It was because she hadn't taken the blood pressure medication that had so carefully managed for days. "Hang in there. I'm calling an ambulance right now." He fumbled for his phone and dialed 911 with a trembling hand, but he couldn't answer any of the operator's questions. "What's her primary hospital? Does she have any pre-existing conditions? Do you have her list of medications?" "I don't know. My wife handled all of that." He knew nothing, absolutely nothing about a matter concerning his own mother's life. That absolute powerlessness completely shattered Mason's pride. A few minutes later, sirens approached and paramedics rushed in. They loaded his mother onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. Mason scrambled in after them, the wailing siren echoing in the small space. The destination, ironically, was the same hospital he had fled from just yesterday. In the emergency room waiting area, Mason shivered on a metal chair, waiting for news on his mother's condition. His clothes were stained and wry. No one was there to help him, no one to comfort him. An overwhelming sense of loneliness and terror consumed him. Hours later, the door to the treatment room finally opened. The same elderly doctor emerged, his face etched with exhaustion and deep anger. "We've stabilized her, but she's in critical condition. Why didn't you give her the prescribed medication for several days?" Mason looked down, unable to say a word. The doctor sighed heavily and opened his clipboard. "I showed you the financial records yesterday, but what I really should have shown you were these records." The doctor handed him a thick stack of notebooks. It was a log of every late-night emergency transport his mother had required for over a decade. He flipped through the pages, a staggering number of dates listed. 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Your mother's condition worsened during the night several times a month. Every single time accompanied her in the ambulance alone. Mason's eyes widened as he stared at the records. And there were days she would stay here with her until morning, then go straight to work. Did you or your family ever once try to know about this? No. All kept it all hidden, out of consideration for you. She made sure never to disturb your family's sleep. Those words stabbed Mason's heart like a sharp blade. The reason they had lived so comfortably was because had been their shield, sacrificing her own life to protect them. The person who cared most about your mother was without a doubt, and you drove her out with violence. At the doctor's words, Mason finally collapsed to his knees. Unable to bear the weight of the truth, he crumpled onto the cold hospital floor. "I was wrong. We can't live without her." Waves of regret far too late washed over him. Crouching on the floor, Mason gripped his smartphone. "I'll apologize. I'll get on my knees and beg her to come back." Mason was still clinging to a sliver of hope, but even that pathetic hope was about to be utterly crushed. Crouched on the cold hospital floor, Mason felt like he was suffocating under the weight of regret and despair. The terrifying truth of their utter dependence on Alara had just crashed down on him. At that moment, the phone in his pocket vibrated. The screen showed the name of his shady college friend. As if possessed, Mason lifted his head and answered with a trembling hand. "Hey, what did you find? Do you know where she's going?" Mason's voice was pleading. A sleazy laugh came from the other end of the line. "Found it. Your wife's flight schedule. Got the flight number and everything." Mason's heart pounded. "Really? When? Where is she flying from?" "Tell me." "Tomorrow morning. A direct flight to Canada from JFK." A twisted expression of relief spread across Mason's face. "There's still time. She's still in the country. I can definitely catch her at the airport tomorrow morning. I'll wait for her at the departure gate and drag her back by force." Mason let out a deep breath, a crazed chuckle escaping his lips in the darkness. "Mom, wait here for a little bit. I promise I'll be back for you," Mason told his mother, who lay unconscious in the treatment room. He then bolted from the hospital and rushed home in a taxi. He opened the door to his dark, powerless house and sensed someone was there. In the living room, illuminated only by moonlight, a figure was huddled on the sofa. It was Chloe, who was supposed to have run away with her large suitcase. "Big brother, you're back." Chloe looked up at Mason, her face swollen from crying. "What are you doing here?" "I thought you were crashing at a friend's house," Mason asked coldly. Chloe burst into hysterical tears. "None of my friends would take me in. The rumor that I'm caught up in some police trouble has already spread. They all said they don't want to get involved and blocked me on social media." Her phone screen was a sea of red message. "Failed to send errors. I have no money, nowhere to go. What am I supposed to do now?" The consequences of her selfish, arrogant life had left her completely isolated. Without wallet, she had no real friends. Just then, the sound of a scooter stopping in front of the house broke the silence. A special late-night delivery. A mail carrier was holding a certified letter. Mason, with a terrible sense of foreboding, accepted the envelope at the door. He shone his phone's flashlight on the return address. The moment he saw it, his fingers began to tremble violently. It was from the Human Resources Department of the company he had worked at for years. With a shaking hand, he ripped open the envelope and pulled out the thick document inside. At the top of the first page in bold black letters were the words, "Notice of Termination." Mason's vision went white, his breathing stopped, and a fierce ringing filled his ears. The document detailed the reasons for the end of his life as he knew it. Gross misconduct, bringing a criminal investigation to the workplace, and severely damaging the company's reputation and integrity. For these clear violations of company policy, he was terminated effective immediately. Furthermore, because he had caused significant damages, he would not receive any severance pay. "No, my career, everything I built." Mason crumpled the paper in his fist and collapsed. The job he had clung to for years, the stable salary, all of it had vanished into thin air, turned to ash by a single piece of paper. The car loan, the massive debts, the exorbitant hospital bills, all remained. He had lost his social standing, his credit, everything. He was at zero. No, not zero. He was starting from a negative number he could never climb out of. But this extreme despair drove Mason completely insane. "No, I'm not the one at fault. This is all because she selfishly left. If I can just bring Alara back, I can explain to the company it was all a misunderstanding. If I can make her drop the lawsuit, everything will go back to normal. Fix my life. I need her." Mason's mind was now filled with this selfish, twisted hope. Tomorrow morning, I will catch her at the airport. I'll beat her. I'll make her cry, but I will drag her back to this house. Mason's eyes were bloodshot, all rational thought gone. Tomorrow morning, he would get to the International Departure Terminal at JFK early, loudly assert his legal rights as her husband. He would put on a tearful performance, trying to win the sympathy of onlookers. If that didn't work, he would grab her arm and physically drag her away. Mason's heart held no love or remorse for his wife, only a desperate obsession to reclaim the comfortable life he had lost. Chloe, with a vacant look in her eyes, nodded at Mason's crazed words. "Yes, big brother, you have to bring that woman back, otherwise we're really going to starve to death here." They were still only thinking of their own needs and desires, with no respect for Ala's heart or her future. And that is why they couldn't see it. They couldn't understand why Arara's lawyer remained silent in the face of Mason's rampage. They couldn't comprehend that the old passport took was not just a piece of paper, but a symbol of her Canadian nursing qualifications, a credential that gave her absolute legal rights and the protection of a strong national border. They didn't realize that no matter how much Mason waited and screamed at the airport, an overwhelming power he could never overcome was already in motion. Mason was convinced he had seized his last chance for a comeback. He truly believed that if he just got to the airport tomorrow morning, everything would be solved. But it was a false hope, a delusion born from his own madness. Tomorrow they would taste the greatest and worst despair and humiliation of their lives. They would be forced to learn that the light of hope they were chasing was just a cruel mirage. The final judgment for those who had trampled on Allah's dignity and used her for their own convenience was fast approaching. Early morning at JFK International Airport's Terminal 1, the massive departure lobby was bustling with travelers pulling suitcases. Amidst this vibrant, extraordinary scene, Mason's appearance was bizarre. He was still in yesterday's clothes. His suit wrinkled and dirty, his hair was greasy, and his bloodshot eyes held a strange, feverish glint. A sour stench emanated from his unwashed body. Passing travelers grimaced and deliberately avoided him. But Mason paid no attention to the stares. His mind was completely dominated by a single selfish obsession. The check-in counter for the direct flight to Canada. Mason lurked behind a nearby pillar, his eyes scanning the crowd like a predator waiting for its prey. Check-in started an hour ago. She has to come here. She can't get on the plane without passing through here. The moment I see her, I'll grab her arm no matter who's watching. I'll scream that I'm her husband, that this woman is a thief trying to escape with our family's money. The airport police will have to side with me. It's all her fault I was fired, that my debts were exposed. So I'll drag her home and make her dedicate the rest of her life to us. I'll make her do twice the chores, twice the caregiving, until the day she dies. A twisted, ugly smile was plastered on Mason's face. But time passed mercilessly. 8 light a.m. came and went. Then 8:30 a.m., but there was no sign of Ara. The boarding deadline was fast approaching. A cold sweat dripped endlessly from Mason's forehead. This is strange. Why isn't she here? Is she lost? Losing his patience, Mason finally rushed to the check-in counter. He slammed his hands down on the desk in front of a busy female agent. "Hey, has a woman named Alara Thompson checked in yet?" Startled by the outburst, the agent responded calmly but firmly. "I'm sorry, sir. I cannot disclose passenger information or their check-in status. Don't screw with me. I'm her husband. She's a criminal who stole my money." Mason's roar silenced the vast lobby. Travelers stopped and stared at him with suspicion. But Mason's madness was unstoppable. "Check your computer now. Bring her to me immediately." He pounded the counter again and again, spitting as he yelled. "That will be quite enough." A low, icy voice, as cold as a serpent's hiss, came from behind him. Mason spun around to see several airport security officers surrounding him. In the center stood an older man in a well-tailored suit. The man's eyes looked down on him as if he were a rock on the side of the road. "Mr. Mason Thompson, I presume I am Alara's attorney." The moment he heard those words, Mason's face flushed with rage. Where did you hide her?" "The flight is about to leave." Mason lunged for the lawyer, but the security officers twisted his arms behind his back. "Let go of me. I'm just asserting my legal rights as a husband." "The flight time?" "Ah, you mean this 900 a.m. flight?" The lawyer glanced at his luxury watch and chuckled coldly. "All is not on that flight." "What? You're lying." "My friend got me solid information. We anticipated that you would use illegal means to find her departure information. That is why we left a dummy booking for you to find." The lawyer's quiet words made Mason's mind go blank. A dummy? A trap? Had he been dancing in the palm of their hands this whole time? Then where is she now? "I won't let her get away," Mason screamed desperately. The lawyer slowly and crude delivered the truth. Ara already departed for Canada yesterday on a different flight. A pathetic choked sound escaped Mason's lips yesterday. "No, that's a lie. I reported her as a high-risk missing person to the police. There's no way she could have passed through a secure airport gate." The lawyer dismissed Mason's frantic rebuttal as if brushing away a piece of lint. "Regarding the false report you filed, we submitted our evidence to the police first thing yesterday morning. You dug your own grave and drew the full attention of the police to yourself. It was during that window of opportunity, the biggest blind spot you created, that departed through the safest possible route." Mason felt the strength drain from his legs. The counterattack he thought was so perfect had actually aided escape. That stupid woman. She's just a high school graduate. She couldn't have been smart enough to pull this off. This is all you're doing, you lawyers scheming for money. At Mason's pathetic, insulting scream, all emotion vanished from the lawyer's face. Stupid. A woman with a high school education. You truly know nothing, do you? The lawyer pulled a copy of an old document from his briefcase and thrust it in front of Mason's face. It was a formal certificate, densely packed with English text, has always held a confirmed eligibility for Canadian permanent residency. Furthermore, she obtained an advanced specialized nursing license there at a very young age. Mason couldn't comprehend the words. He could only blink stupidly. Permanent residency, an overseas nursing license. 27 years ago, she was an exceptionally talented individual active in the front lines of healthcare overseas. She was fluent in multiple languages and had received enthusiastic offers from numerous hospitals. The lawyer's voice echoed cold and heavy in the silent airport lobby. But she threw away that brilliant career to marry you. Because she was an orphan, she truly believed your family would become her own real family. She sealed away her own limitless potential for the sake of your family. Mason couldn't breathe. The air wouldn't enter his lungs. All he could do was open and close his mouth like a gasping fish. The woman he had looked down on for 27 years, the woman he thought he had benevolently saved from a life on the streets, was in fact a superior, more valuable human being than he could ever hope to be. She had sacrificed a future of global success for him, and in return, you treated her like a free servant. You lived arrogantly off the money she earned through her back-breaking, blood-sweating night shifts. And in the end, you pushed her down the stairs and tried to kill her. The lawyer's words were like sharp daggers, stabbing Mason's heart again and again. Yesterday, she flew away to reclaim her own life for the first time in 27 years. You will never again have the chance to cling to her. The lawyer delivered the final verdict, businesslike and cold. We have already coordinated with local law enforcement there and completed all legal procedures to completely bar you. If you ever attempt to contact her in any way, you will be arrested as an international criminal. Mason finally collapsed, crumbling pathetically onto the cold airport floor. The surrounding travelers looked down at him like a piece of filthy trash. It's a lie. It has to be a lie. He felt the giant pillar that had supported his entire life completely vanish. He could never return to that warm, comfortable house. He was buried in debt, fired from his job with his social credibility at zero. He was left alone to carry the burden of a bedridden mother and a helpless, useless sister, destined to suffer for the rest of his life, sipping dirty water at the bottom of a dark pit. It was all his own fault, the complete and utter consequence of his own bottomless arrogance and cruelty. Only Mason's animalistic screams echoed emptily through the cold airport lobby, on his knees on the cold floor of JFK. Men, women, and children alike skirted around the pathetic weeping man as if he were a pile of filth. Security guards hauled Mason to his feet. "You're causing a disturbance, sir. You need to leave immediately." With a cold voice, they dragged him from the departure lobby and threw him outside. The automatic doors slid shut behind him, and the cold air hit him like a slap. Mason didn't even have enough money in his pocket for a train ticket home. The few dollars he had were spent on yesterday's taxi. His credit cards were useless. No one would help him. He began to walk, dragging his heavy feet for hours. His shoes wore through and his feet bled. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in his heart. After a full day of walking, he finally reached his familiar neighborhood. The sun had set and it was pitch black. He was on the verge of collapsing from hunger and exhaustion when he arrived in front of his house. He stopped dead, unable to believe his eyes. An unfamiliar truck was parked in front of the dark, powerless house. Men in work clothes were using a drill to destroy the lock on his front door. "Hey, what are you doing to my house?" he screamed in a hoarse voice. A man in a suit turned to him with an icy gaze. Mr. Mason Thompson, we've been waiting for you." The man mercilessly shoved a stiff document into Mason's chest. It was an official eviction notice from the court. "The sale of this house has been finalized. As per the new owner's wishes, Demolition will begin tomorrow. Today, we are changing the locks and prohibiting entry. Mason was speechless, his eyes darting between the paper and the men's faces. Eviction? You can't just tell me that. This is my house. I won't let you sell it. The man sighed, a look of pity on his face. The title to the building is in Miss Aller Thompson's name. There are no legal issues. The injunction you filed to block the sale was immediately nullified once the police investigation confirmed that your embezzlement claim was fraudulent. Mason's final, desperate gambit had backfired spectacularly. His own vile lies had only accelerated the loss of his home. The men pushed past him and continued their work, wrapping thick, no trespassing tape across the front door. Mason had been literally locked out of his own home. Just then, Chloe came running from behind the house, crying hysterically. She was clutching a single small handbag. "Big brother, what's going on? We can't get inside." Her face was twisted in terror. "Those men changed the locks, my clothes, my designer bags. They're all still inside." Mason stared at the ground, unable to answer. "You brought that woman back, right? Go yell at her and get our house back." Chloe grabbed Mason's shirt, shaking him violently. Mason wordlessly pushed her hands away. "It's over. She went to Canada. She's never coming back." At those words, Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. "No. Then what am I supposed to do? I can't work. Big brother, you have to do something." Her selfish, shrill voice pounded in Mason's ears. "You do something." Those were the exact words Mason had always thrown at, the ugly sight of someone completely dependent on others, unable to solve their own problems. It was a mirror image of himself. For the first time, Mason truly understood how foolish and grotesque he had been. Mason's phone vibrated. The caller ID was the general hospital where his mother had been taken. With a trembling finger, he answered. "Hello, is this Mr. Thompson? This is the hospital billing department." A cold businesslike voice said, "Your mother's condition has stabilized, so we need to discuss her future care. I'm afraid continued hospitalization here is impossible due to the extensive unpaid medical bills and the lack of a responsible party to guarantee payment." Mason's throat was dry. "Impossible. Then what are we supposed to do?" "You will take your mother home tomorrow. It is the family's responsibility to provide 2 4-hour home care. No house, no electricity, no money, and he was an unemployed man drowning in debt. We can't. There's no one at home who can take care of her, changing diapers, feeding her. We can't do it." The voice on the other end was devoid of sympathy. "That is a family matter, not the hospital's concern. Please arrange to pick her up by noon tomorrow. Goodbye." The call ended. Mason dropped his phone and collapsed onto the cold asphalt. In front of him, the house he could no longer enter. Beside him, a useless, selfish sister who could only wail. And tomorrow, his bedridden mother would be unceremoniously dumped on them. Behind him, a mountain of debt he could never repay. This was the brutal price for 27 years of treating Ara like a slave. They hadn't been robbed of anything. They had simply been dragged back down to the reality of their own capabilities. With the massive, powerful shield of Ara gone, the harshness of the real world had finally sunk its teeth into them. The unforgivable sins of their arrogance and cruelty had become a inescapable hell that was now swallowing them whole. The reversal was no longer a possibility. It was an absolute reality that had completely shattered Mason's mind. The next afternoon, under a cold, heavy rain, Mason and Chloe trudged back to the hospital. It was time to obey the merciless discharge order. In the hospital room, their mother sat on the bed, completely devoid of her former spirit. As they packed her meager belongings, the doctor's cold stare burned into their backs. Just as they were about to leave the room, he spoke. "May I ask you one last thing?" The doctor's quiet voice stopped them in their tracks. When they turned, he was looking at them with a gaze mixed with contempt and profound anger. "You were his family, weren't you?" None of them could answer. A long, suffocating silence filled the room. Mason looked down, able to do nothing but clench his fists. The doctor sighed, a deep, heavy sound, and continued. "Then why? Why did none of you notice until the person who supported your lives and your very existence for 27 years had to give up everything and flee the country?" No one could speak. Their throats were dry. as if they had forgotten how to form words. The ugly truth that they had never once seen as a human being was being driven into them with the sharpest of points. They fled the room, the doctor's words sticking in their backs like daggers. Thrown out of the hospital, the three of them wandered through the cold rain. They had no home to return to, no relatives to turn to, and not a single dollar for a hotel room. Supporting their mother, who could barely walk, they searched for a place to shelter from the wind and rain. They ended up in a gazebo in a dark, deserted park. They roughly sat their mother down on a cold wooden bench. The temperature was dropping, and the biting wind and rain relentlessly stole their body heat, hunger, cold, and a future of absolute despair. This extreme state finally shattered the last vestiges of their family bond. "I can't take this anymore. I can't." Chloe, shivering at the end of the bench, suddenly started screaming like a mad woman. "I have my own life. Why do I have to go through this? Big brother, Mom, you can do whatever you want. I'm living for myself now." With those treacherous words, she grabbed her small handbag and ran off into the rainy, dark city, never once looking back. "Wait, are you just going to leave your mother?" Mason's empty cry was swallowed by the sound of the rain. Left behind were a debt-ridden, unemployed man and a bedridden old woman. Mason ran his wet hair back and collapsed weakly onto the bench. "Mason, I'm cold, I'm hungry." His mother whimpered beside him. "Ara, call for me. I want her warm soup. I want her to warm me up." His mother, completely delirious, was now crying out for the very person she had tried to kill. The grotesque, pathetic sight cut even deeper into Mason's shattered soul. Just then, the phone in Mason's pocket vibrated. It was an email from Aller's lawyer. "This is to inform you that the divorce was officially finalized today. Also, per our client's request, we are forwarding the following article URL." With a trembling finger, Mason tapped the link. The screen changed to an overseas medical news site. There was a photo of a beautiful small town covered in Canadian snow. At the top of the article was a large photo of a familiar woman. She was dressed in a crisp, clean, beautiful nurse's uniform. She was in a warm, bright lounge with a fire burning in the fireplace. Smiling patients and local colleagues surrounded her. They looked at her with genuine respect and gratitude. And most importantly, Aller's expression. It was a radiant smile Mason had never seen in 27 years. It was the face of a person who was deeply fulfilled, living her own life with strength and purpose. Tears streamed down Mason's face. A guttural animalistic sob was wrenched from his throat. A warm room, a smiling table, human warmth, respect, and gratitude. These were all things Aller had tried to give them, but they had trampled it all under their dirty feet and thrown it in the gutter. And now Ara, through her own strength, had found it all in a faraway land. Not as someone's free servant, not as someone's property, but as a dignified human being, savoring true happiness. The absolute contrast between the warm light on the screen and their own cold, miserable reality completely crushed Mason and his mother. His mother, seeing the phone screen, collapsed in despair, pressing her face into the cold, muddy ground and sobbing violently. Mason couldn't move. He just stared up at the dark sky and wailed. For the first time he understood with piercing clarity. What he had lost wasn't a convenient caregiver. It wasn't a wife who brought in money. It was the only family in the world who had loved and supported him unconditionally. But no matter how much he regretted it, no matter how much he cried, time would never turn back. In Ara's brilliant future, there was no longer any need for them, not even a millimeter. The cold rain continued to fall, beating down on the sinful family without any mercy. In the depths of regret and despair, their lives had completely and eternally ended. Months passed. The season changed from fall to a harsh winter. Mason's life was a living hell. Chloe, who had run away, was quickly picked up by the police. Hounded by debt collectors, she was forcibly returned to Mason's care. The two of them now lived in an old drafty apartment. They couldn't even afford to pay the electricity bill, so the room was always dim and freezing. Their bedridden mother lay there with them. The complex bureaucracy of social services, the harsh negotiations over unpaid hospital bills, the endless waiting lists for nursing homes, all of it fell on their shoulders. Big brother, change her diaper. It stinks. Chloe would cry, but Mason didn't have the energy to get up. You do it. I have to go to my day labor job tomorrow. They insulted each other, passing the buck in an endless, ugly cycle. Sleep-deprived, exhausted, and stressed, they were at their breaking point. The complicated arrangements for an accessible taxi to the hospital, the strict management of his mother's complex medication schedule they were now learning. In their very bones, the sheer volume of work had managed alone. Lying on the cold floor, Mason would weep. For 27 years, they had forced this hell upon her. A warm meal, clean clothes. They would never have these things again. They would just rot away miserably in a cold, endless regret. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Canada, in a beautiful, quiet town where snow was falling, was in a warm room with a crackling fire. Outside it was freezing, but inside it was cozy. She sat on a plush sofa, slowly sipping a cup of hot tea. Good morning, Alara. It's another beautiful day, a colleague said, a genuine smile on her face. Good morning. It really is a lovely morning, Ala replied brightly, her own smile natural and easy. Months after being pushed down those cold stairs, the wounds in her heart had completely healed. Here, no one insulted her or looked down on her. Everyone respected her experience and skills. The patients constantly expressed their gratitude for her gentle care. We are so lucky to have you here, they would say. Each time she heard those words, Era's heart filled with a warm light. The days of being consumed as someone's free servant, of having her existence erased as a convenient caregiver. All of it felt like a bad dream from a distant,